I recently faced my own worst nightmare. The HOA sisters just turned their lifted Escalade into a mailbox wrecking ball with my week's worth of mail still inside. And their excuse? They said the mailbox was too close to the street. Funny thing is, the only thing they ever test is how far they can push my patience. Let me start from the beginning. It started, as most things do in my life, with a noise. Not a polite little knock or a gentle ping. This was a crunched, deep, sickening sound of metal and wood giving up the ghost. I was in the kitchen making my wife, Emily, her morning tea, and I knew that sound. I'd heard it 3 times before. I looked out the window, past the perfectly manicured lawn that was my weekend burden, and saw the familiar back end of a hulking black Escalade pulling away from my curb. My mailbox, or what was left of it, lay on the grass like a fallen soldier. A few splinters of the wooden post pointed accusingly at the sky. Laughter, shrill and mocking, drifted back from the SUV's open window. They did it again, I said, my voice flat. Emily, my first mate in suburban warfare, was already at my side. She came up behind me, wrapping her arms around my waist. She rested her chin on my shoulder, her sigh warm against my neck. Just let it go, Daniel. It's just a mailbox. But it wasn't, was it? It was about the smug, entitled face of our HOA president, Cynthia, and the even worse face of her sister, Dolores, who lived with her and acted as her personal stormtrooper. For 6 months since we'd moved into this suburban paradise, they had made our lives a low-grade, simmering misery. They'd targeted us from day one. Why? I still wasn't sure. Maybe they didn't like the color of our welcome mat. Maybe they heard me chuckle once when Cynthia tripped over a sprinkler head. Or maybe, just maybe, they were miserable, power-hungry trolls who got their kicks from tormenting people who just wanted to be left alone. The mailbox was their favorite game. The first time, I assumed it was an accident. I filed a police report. The officer who showed up barely bothered to get out of his car. Looks like someone took the turn a little wide, he'd said with a yawn. Happens all the time. He didn't seem interested when I pointed out the tire tracks leading directly from Cynthia's driveway across the street to my flattened mailbox post. The second time, I sent Cynthia a polite email with a photo. She replied with a copy of the HOA rule book, highlighting the section on proper mailbox maintenance, with a bill for a new post attached. The third time, I installed a steel post. They just hit it harder, denting their own bumper in the process, which seemed to infuriate them even more. Each time I called the police, each time I was told there was no proof, no witnesses, just a very unlucky mailbox. It was a joke. I was living in a cartoon where the villains had diplomatic immunity. I tried presenting video from my doorbell camera at an HOA meeting. Cynthia, sitting on her throne at the head of the community center table, refused to even look at it. Board matters only, Mr. Peterson, she'd said, her voice dripping with condescension. We don't mediate petty neighborhood squabbles. Dolores, sitting beside her, had smirked. That smirk was the fuel for my fire. It was a nasty, all-knowing expression that said, we can do anything we want, and you can't stop us. I was a methodical man. I liked plans. I liked order. I didn't like bullies. And I was fiercely protective of my wife and the quiet life we were trying to build. Emily had been through a lot the year before, and this house, this garden, this peace and quiet, it was supposed to be her sanctuary, her recovery. And these 2 witches were stomping all over it with their designer boots and their 3-ton gas guzzler. My stubbornness, a trait Emily sometimes called my most infuriating and most endearing quality, kicked into high gear. If the system wouldn't help me, I would build my own system. So I built it. My masterpiece, my monument to spite. I dug a hole 3 feet deep and filled it with 800 pounds of reinforced concrete. Sunk into that concrete was a thick steel pole. Around that pole, I built what looked like a normal, large, black aluminum mailbox, but it was a fortress. The mailbox itself was mounted on hidden, heavy-duty springs designed to absorb and repel an impact. The access door had a magnetic lock that was tougher than a bank vault. But my favorite part, my little touch of creative genius, was the payload. I rigged 2 canisters of washable, neon pink chalk spray inside, aimed directly at the front of whatever might hit it. And for the grand finale, a small, weatherproof speaker connected to a motion sensor. My Uncle Walter, a man whose approach to life was 1 part engineering genius and 2 parts glorious chaos, thought it was the best idea he'd ever heard. You should make the speaker play opera, he cackled over the phone. Or maybe a recording of a pig squealing. Drive 'em nuts. I opted for something a little more direct, a simple, Pre-recorded message in my own calm voice. I think you've hit something. Neighbors craned their necks, mouths agape, phones rising in unison. 2 weeks went by. The new mailbox stood proud and untouched. I could feel their eyes on it every time they drove past. I could practically hear their tiny, evil brains trying to figure it out. Then came this morning, the crunch. But this time, it was followed by other sounds. The screech of tortured metal, the loud, explosive bang of a tire blowing out, and then a hiss of steam. I walked out to the curb. Emily followed, her hand over her mouth. The Escalade hadn't driven off this time. It was stalled, its front end crumpled like a cheap soda can against my mailbox, which had tilted a few degrees but was otherwise perfectly fine. The front passenger side tire was shredded. Steam poured from under the hood, and the entire front bumper, grille, and hood of that big, black SUV were coated in a thick, vibrant, gloriously obnoxious layer of neon pink. My speaker was cheerfully repeating its line. I think you've hit something. I think you've hit something. Cynthia was in the driver's seat, her face pale with shock. Dolores was trying to get out of the passenger side, screaming obscenities that would make a sailor blush. A small crowd of neighbors was starting to gather, phones out, recording the beautiful carnage. I saw Dolores's eyes lock onto mine. The shock in them was quickly being replaced by a pure, uncut rage that was terrifying to behold. The war wasn't over. It looked like I had just armed the other side with a nuclear bomb. We had bought the house for the garden. That's what Emily told everyone. It was a sprawling, neglected space in the backyard, full of possibilities, a blank canvas. After a year spent mostly indoors, fighting a battle that left her tired and pale, the idea of digging her hands into the earth and making something beautiful grow was the best medicine anyone could have prescribed. The neighborhood was called Lakeside Meadows, which was a fancy name for a suburb with a large pond that bred aggressive geese. But the houses were nice, the trees were old, and the brochure promised a tight-knit community of friendly neighbors. We learned quickly that tight-knit was just another word for everyone is in your business. The head of that business was Cynthia, the HOA president. We met her on our first weekend. She didn't bring a welcome basket. She brought a clipboard and a measuring tape. She walked around our property, making little notes and tooting noises. She informed us that our lawn was 1/4 of an inch too high, our garbage cans were visible from the street, and the trim on our shutters was an unapproved shade of white. She had a smile that never reached her eyes and a voice that sounded like she was perpetually disappointed in you. With her, as always, was her sister, Dolores. If Cynthia was the icy queen of passive aggression, Dolores was her rabid attack dog. Dolores didn't speak much. She mostly just stood behind Cynthia, a few feet to the left, arms crossed, glaring. She was a large, imposing woman who seemed to fill whatever space she occupied with a kind of menacing silence. While Cynthia picked us apart with rules and regulations, Dolores just stared at me, then at Emily, her eyes filled with a kind of bored contempt. It was clear from that first meeting that they ran this neighborhood like their own personal kingdom. I tried to be reasonable. I cut the grass. I built a small fence to hide the garbage cans. I even repainted the shutters in HOA-approved eggshell majesty, or whatever nonsense color she demanded. I figured if we played by the rules, they'd leave us alone. That was my first mistake. Bullies don't want compliance. They want fear. They want control. When they see you complying, they don't see a good neighbor. They see a soft target. The real trouble started over Emily's garden. She had spent weeks planning it, sketching out designs for flower beds and a vegetable patch. She pored over seed catalogs with a kind of joy I hadn't seen in her for a long time. It was her project, her happy place. The day the truck delivered a yard of rich, dark topsoil and dumped it on a tarp in our driveway, Cynthia and Dolores appeared as if summoned by a dark ritual. Unauthorized landscaping alteration, Cynthia announced, tapping her clipboard. All major garden projects must be submitted to the Architectural Review Committee for approval. The what? I asked. It's our backyard. We're planting tomatoes, not building a skyscraper. Rules are rules, Mr. Peterson, she said, that fake smile plastered on her face. And that pile of dirt is a violation of Section 8, Paragraph 3, temporary unsightly obstructions. It's dirt, I said, trying to keep my voice even. It will be gone by this evening when we move it to the backyard. Dolores took a step forward. You heard my sister, she grunted. It was one of the first times I'd heard her speak more than 2 words. Her voice was a low growl, like gravel in a blender. Get rid of it, or you'll be fined. That was the moment the lines were drawn. It wasn't about a pile of dirt. It was about them telling my wife, who was standing right there looking heartbroken, that she couldn't have her garden. It was about them trying to take away the one thing that was bringing the light back into her eyes. That was a line they were not going to cross. Not on my watch. I spent the rest of the day moving the soil, my anger fueling every shovelful. We got our first fine the next day, a crisp $50 penalty for failure to comply. That's when I called my Uncle Walter. Walter was my mother's younger brother, a retired electrical engineer who now spent his days tinkering, inventing things the world didn't need, and offering life advice that was usually terrible but always entertaining. An HOA, he'd said over the phone. Oh, those are the worst. It's like a tiny little government run by the most bored and power-mad people in the neighborhood. So what's the plan? We can build a catapult, fling water balloons full of mud onto her prize-winning petunias. No, wait, better idea, squirrels. We train an army of squirrels to steal all her mail. I'm thinking of a more legal approach, Uncle Walter, I'd said. Boring, he declared, but fine. You know what you need to do, Daniel? You need to read their book. Read every single stupid rule they've ever written. People like that, they love their rules, but they're so in love with them, they forget to follow them themselves. Find where they're breaking their own rules. That's the weak spot. That's how you get them. He was right. It was time to stop being a polite target and start being a student of the game. That night, I downloaded the 300-page HOA covenant and bylaws. I poured a cup of coffee, sat down at my desk, and started to read. I was going to learn their book better than they did. The fines, the threats, the constant harassment, it was all a distraction. The real war wouldn't be fought on the lawn or at the mailbox. It would be fought in the fine print. And I had a feeling that Cynthia and Dolores had gotten so used to people rolling over that they'd gotten sloppy. I just had to find the proof. The first official shot in our one-sided war wasn't a crushed mailbox or a nasty word. It was a letter, a stiff, cream-colored envelope left tucked under our doormat. Inside was an official notice from the Lakeside Meadows Homeowners Association. It was a fine, not for dirt, not for the lawn. This was for Emily's wind chimes. They were a gift from her mother, a delicate thing of bamboo and polished stone that made a soft, woody music in the breeze. Emily loved them. She said they sounded peaceful. According to the letter, signed with Cynthia's flourish of a signature, the wind chimes were a violation of the nuisance noise ordinance. A $200 fine. The letter stated that they had received multiple complaints from neighbors about the incessant and disruptive clatter. I knew for a fact this was a lie. Our closest neighbors were the Wilsons, a sweet elderly couple who were half-deaf, and the Wongs, a young family who were rarely home. I'd specifically asked Mrs. Wilson if the chimes bothered her. She'd smiled and said, "Oh dear, are those new? They sound lovely. Reminds me of my trip to Bali." So multiple complaints was code for Dolores heard them and decided she didn't like them. This was a direct, personal attack. They had gone after Emily's garden, and now they were going after a gift from her mother. They were deliberately targeting the things that brought her small moments of joy. That night, I watched Emily take the wind chimes down, her movements slow and sad. She didn't cry, but I could see the hurt in her eyes. That was it. No more playing defense. I'm fighting this, I told her, holding the violation notice. All of it. How? She asked, her voice small. They just make up the rules as they go. You can't win, Daniel. You can, I said, feeling a cold, hard resolve settle in my chest. You just have to be more stubborn than they are. My first move was to arm myself with knowledge. I spent the entire weekend hunched over my laptop, the HOA covenant open in one window and the town's property laws in another. I read every line, every subsection, every obscure addendum. It was as thrilling as watching paint dry, but Uncle Walter's words echoed in my head. Find where they're breaking their own rules. And oh boy, did I find it. The rule book stated that all fines must be preceded by a written warning with a 30-day period to correct the issue. We had never received a warning about the wind chimes. Strike one. It also stated that all complaints cited in a violation notice must be formally logged, dated, and signed by the complaining resident. I sent a polite, registered letter to the HOA board requesting a copy of the signed complaints against us. I knew they didn't exist. Strike two. But the real gold mine was in the section about the Architectural Review Committee, the same committee that was supposed to approve Emily's garden. The bylaws were crystal clear. The committee must consist of at least 3 members elected annually by the homeowners. I did some digging. I sent a few casual emails to other neighbors asking who was on the committee. No one knew. A little more digging through the public records on the HOA website revealed the truth. There was no committee. There hadn't been an election for 1 in 4 years. Cynthia had simply appointed herself the sole, unelected member. She was a dictator ruling from a throne of unread paperwork. Strike 3. Armed with this information, I drafted my response. It wasn't an angry letter. It was a cold, precise, legal document. I cited the specific bylaws they had violated in issuing the fine. I pointed out the lack of a warning, the non-existent complaints, and the illegitimacy of the committee that was supposedly governing all architectural and landscaping decisions. I concluded by stating that not only was the fine for the wind chimes null and void, but so was every single fine issued by Cynthia under the guise of the non-existent committee for the past 4 years. I sent it via certified mail, with a copy to every single resident in Lakeside Meadows. The fallout was immediate. My phone started ringing. Neighbors I'd barely spoken to were calling to thank me. It turned out dozens of people had been fined for absurd things. Having a basketball hoop, painting their front door the wrong shade of red, leaving a child's bicycle on the driveway. They had all just paid up, too intimidated by Cynthia and Dolores to fight back. For the first time, people felt like they had a chance. The response from Cynthia was not a letter. It was Dolores, standing on my front porch the next evening, her face a thundercloud. "You think you're smart, don't you?" she snarled, her voice low and menacing. "I think I can read," I replied calmly, standing in my doorway. I didn't invite her in. She took a step closer, trying to use her size to intimidate me. "My sister runs this neighborhood. You made a big mistake going against her. You and your little wife are going to regret it." She wasn't just angry. She was furious that someone had dared to question their authority. Her eyes were chips of ice. The threat hung in the air between us, heavy and real. This wasn't about bylaws anymore. It was personal. And I knew, looking at the pure venom in her expression, that their next move wasn't going to come in a cream-colored envelope. After my little legal bombshell, the neighborhood atmosphere shifted. Before, it was quiet, but it was the quiet of fear. Now, there was a buzz. People would give me a little nod when I got the mail. Mrs. Wilson from next door dropped off a plate of cookies. A few homeowners who had been unfairly fined started talking about a class action lawsuit. The fear was still there, but now it was mixed with a little bit of hope, and that made Cynthia and Dolores furious. Their power was built on unopposed intimidation, and I had just shown everyone that their throne was standing on wobbly legs. Their retaliation was swift and petty. They couldn't fine us anymore, not with their authority being questioned, so they resorted to pure harassment. One morning, we woke up to find our car doors smeared with what looked and smelled suspiciously like expired mayonnaise. Another day, our garbage cans, which I had so carefully hidden behind a small fence, were dragged out and tipped over in the middle of our driveway, their contents strewn across the asphalt for all to see. It was childish, but it was also deeply unsettling. It was a constant, low-level reminder that we were being watched. Emily was getting scared. "Daniel, maybe we should just stop," she said one night as I was installing a new set of security cameras. "We made our point. What if they do something worse? What if they try to hurt you? They're just trying to scare us into backing down," I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "If we give in now, they win. They'll run this place forever. This isn't just about us anymore." But seeing the worry etched on her face twisted my gut. How far will a man go to defend his own? The question wasn't just about property anymore. It was about my wife's peace of mind. Was I protecting her, or was my stubbornness just making things worse? Dolores was the primary enforcer of their campaign of terror. She'd take to parking her giant Escalade directly across from our house, sometimes for hours, just sitting there, engine idling, watching. If I was out mowing the lawn, she'd drive by slowly, her window down, just staring at me with that dead-eyed glare. It was unnerving. She was trying to get a reaction, trying to provoke me into doing something stupid so they could call the police on me. I refused to give her the satisfaction. I'd just nod politely as if she were any other neighbor out for a drive. My calm indifference seemed to infuriate her more than any angry outburst ever could. Uncle Walter, my ever-present source of unconventional wisdom, was having the time of his life. He had appointed himself my head of counterintelligence. "Okay, I've been observing the hostiles," he'd say in our daily phone calls, which he insisted on calling intel briefings. Subject Dolores exhibits classic pack predator behavior, circling the prey, testing for weakness. Subject Cynthia is the alpha, directing from the den. I suggest we implement Operation Poodle. We dress a poodle up in a tiny little surveillance vest and let it wander into their yard. They'll never suspect the poodle. We are not weaponizing a poodle, Uncle Walter, I'd say, pinching the bridge of my nose. Their loss, he'd sigh. It would have been adorable and effective. His ridiculousness was a lifeline, a reminder not to let their grim campaign suck all the light out of our lives. But the pressure was mounting. One evening, I was approached by Mr. Davies, a man from down the street who had been one of the most vocal supporters of my pushback. He looked nervous, constantly glancing over his shoulder. "Listen, Daniel," he said, his voice low. "I think you need to be careful." I was at the community pool, and I overheard Cynthia and Dolores talking. "They're looking for something big to use against you. They were talking about combing through your property records, your employment history, anything. They want to ruin you." He looked genuinely scared. "I'm sorry, but my wife, we can't be involved anymore. It's too risky." And just like that, my small army of supporters began to dwindle. The fear was winning again. People were backing away, afraid of being caught in the crossfire. It was becoming clear that Cynthia and Dolores's power wasn't just in the HOA bylaws. It was in their willingness to be crueler and more relentless than anyone else. They weren't just trying to enforce rules anymore. They were trying to destroy my life to make an example out of me. The stakes had just been raised, and I realized I was running out of allies. I was being isolated, and that's when people are most vulnerable. The isolation was a bitter pill to swallow. One by one, the neighbors who had patted me on the back and called me a hero quietly retreated to the safety of their own homes. The phone calls stopped. The supportive emails dried up. It was just me, Emily, and the constant, unnerving presence of Dolores's black Escalade. The message was clear: you are alone. This is what happens when you fight us. My methodical mind knew this was a tactic designed to break my morale, but knowing it and feeling it are two different things. "Maybe Mr. Davies was right," Emily said quietly one evening. We were sitting on our back porch, the only place that felt truly safe. "Maybe they'll dig up something. Some old bill I forgot to pay. Some mistake on a form from 10 years ago. People like that can twist anything. Let them dig," I said, taking her hand. "We have nothing to hide. That's the difference between us and them." But even as I said it, a seed of doubt had been planted. Were we really that squeaky clean? Had I ever, in my entire life, not made a single mistake they could exploit? My strategy had to change. A frontal assault was no longer an option. I needed a new weapon, something they wouldn't see coming. Uncle Walter's voice was in my head again. People like that, they love their rules, but they're so in love with them, they forget to follow them themselves. I had focused on the rules governing homeowners. Now, it was time to look at the rules governing the HOA itself, specifically, the money. Every homeowner paid $500 a year in dues. With 200 homes in the development, that was $100,000 a year. The HOA's publicly available annual budget was a simple one-page document. It listed expenses like landscaping, pool maintenance, and community events. The numbers were big and round and suspiciously vague. No itemized receipts, no specific vendor names, just large pots of money. As a homeowner, I was entitled to review the detailed financial records. I sent another certified letter to the board formally requesting a complete, itemized accounting of all expenditures for the last 3 years. This time, the response was faster. A letter from the HOA's lawyer, a slick firm from downtown. It stated that my request was overly broad and burdensome, and that providing such detailed records would violate the privacy of our trusted vendors. It was legal stonewalling. They were hiding something. Now I was sure of it. I needed a way in. I needed someone on the inside. My best hope was Robert, the HOA treasurer. He was a meek accountant who always seemed terrified of Cynthia. He would stammer and sweat through the financial report at every meeting. I caught up with him one morning while he was walking his beagle. "Robert, I need your help," I said, keeping my voice friendly. "I have some questions about the budget. Cynthia's lawyer is blocking my request to see the books." Robert went pale. He started tugging on his dog's leash. "Two can't, Daniel. Cynthia would kill me. She handles all the payments, all the contracts. I just sign the checks she puts in front of me and prepare the annual summary she gives me." "She gives you the summary?" I asked, my internal alarms blaring. "You don't prepare it from the bank statements yourself?" He shook his head, refusing to meet my eyes. "No, she says it's more efficient that way." He was practically vibrating with fear. I knew I wouldn't get anything more from him. He was too scared. I had hit another dead end. Dejected, I was walking home when a car pulled up beside me. It was Mr. Lin from 2 doors down. He and his wife were a quiet couple, always polite, but they kept to themselves. I'd always assumed they just didn't want to get involved. "Get in," he said, his face serious. I hesitated for a second, then opened the passenger door and slid in. He drove a few blocks away from our street before he spoke. "I saw you talking to Robert. He won't help you. He's a good man, but he's terrified." "I'm starting to get that," I said, my frustration showing. Mr. Lin looked at me. "My wife used to be the HOA secretary 3 years ago. She quit because she saw what Cynthia was doing." He took a deep breath. "Cynthia runs the HOA like her personal piggy bank. She uses the association's credit card for everything: gas, groceries, online shopping. She pays the bill every month with our dues. Then she buries the expenses under miscellaneous maintenance." My wife tried to question it once, and Cynthia and her sister threatened to make our lives a living hell. "We have 2 young kids. We couldn't risk it. We've kept our heads down ever since." It was the breakthrough. "I need a witness. Would she be willing to testify to that?" I asked. Mr. Lin shook his head sadly. "She's too scared." But she kept something. He reached into his glove compartment and pulled out a plain manila envelope. He handed it to me. Before she quit, she made copies of a few of the credit card statements she wasn't supposed to see. She was afraid of getting blamed for it someday. I don't know if it's enough to prove anything, but it's a start. I opened the envelope. Inside were 3 months of credit card statements. My eyes scanned the pages. Charges for a luxury spa, a $500 shopping spree at a designer boutique, dozens of meals at expensive restaurants. And then I saw it. The final page. A recurring monthly payment of $2,000 sent to a law firm I'd never heard of in a different state. It was labeled simply professional services. This wasn't just about skimming for luxuries. This was something else, something much bigger. I had the proof in my hands, but it raised more questions than it answered. What kind of professional services required a secret $2,000 monthly payment from a suburban HOA? The credit card statements were a stick of dynamite, and I was standing in the middle of a minefield. I had proof of embezzlement, clear as day. The spa trips, the shopping sprees, that was bad enough. But the $2,000 monthly payment to an out-of-state law firm, that was the real mystery. It was too consistent, too large. It wasn't random skimming. It was a planned, deliberate expense. My methodical brain went into overdrive. This was the key. I had a choice to make. I could go to the police with what I had, but my past experiences with them had been less than encouraging. They had dismissed mailbox destruction. Would they take financial mismanagement in a small HOA seriously? Or would it get buried in paperwork? I could leak the statements to the entire neighborhood. Let public shame do the work. It would be messy, chaotic, and satisfying, but it felt incomplete. It didn't answer the biggest question. What were they hiding? "So what are you going to do, kid?" Uncle Walter asked during our next briefing. I had told him everything. "You've got him dead to rights. I say we go with Operation Public Humiliation. We print the statements on giant posters and put them up all over the neighborhood, like a surprise art installation. The art of the steal. I'm considering it," I chuckled. "But there's this monthly payment. It feels important. I need to know what it's for." "Ah, a man of mystery," Walter declared. "Fine, be a detective, but don't take too long. You've poked the hornet's nest, and now the queen hornets are plotting." Emily was more cautious. "This is getting scary, Daniel. It's not just about fines anymore. Embezzlement is a crime. These women are not going to give up their little empire without a fight. A cornered animal is the most dangerous." She was right. The moment I made my move, I had to be sure it was the final one. I couldn't afford to miss. This was my moral crossroads. The easy path was to expose the petty corruption. The hard path was to follow the money and uncover the whole truth, whatever the risk. The core question echoed in my mind again. How far will a man go? I looked at Emily, at the worry in her eyes that I had put there. I looked at our home, our sanctuary that had become a battlefield. I wasn't just defending a mailbox or my pride anymore. I was defending the very idea of justice in our small corner of the world. If I backed down now or took the easy way out, I would be letting them win. I would be teaching them that bullying and corruption work as long as you're vicious enough. I couldn't live with that. I decided to take the hard path. I had to know what that $2,000 payment was for. I started with the law firm. A quick search revealed they specialized in discrete legal resolutions and crisis management. That told me a lot. This wasn't for drafting HOA contracts. This was for making a problem go away. But what problem? My first thought was to hire a private investigator, but that was expensive, and I didn't know who to trust. So I became my own investigator. I spent hours online, diving into the murky depths of public records databases and social media archives. I searched for Cynthia's name, Dolores's name, connecting them to anything and everything I could find in the state where that law firm was located. For days, I found nothing. It was a digital dead end. The breakthrough came from an unlikely source, Dolores's ego. She had a long-forgotten social media profile that she hadn't used in years. It was mostly pictures of fancy dinners and sneering selfies. But buried deep in her photo albums was a picture from about 5 years ago. It was a picture of her standing next to a different car, the Escalade's sleek, red sports car. The caption read, "Enjoying the new toy. Too fast for you." The location tag was a city in the same state as the mystery law firm. It was a long shot, a tiny little thread, but it was all I had. I shifted my search. I started looking for traffic incidents, police reports, and news articles involving a red sports car in that city around that time. I spent a whole night sifting through digital archives, my eyes burning from the screen. And then I found it. It was a small article from a local newspaper. Pedestrian injured in hit and run. Police seeking red sports car. The details were sparse. A young woman, a college student, had been struck in a crosswalk. She had survived, but with serious, life-altering injuries. The driver had fled the scene. The case was unsolved. The date of the article was 1 week after Dolores had posted the photo of her new car. My blood ran cold. It couldn't be a coincidence. The car, the location, the timing, and the $2,000 monthly payments to a crisis management law firm. It all clicked into place with a horrifying certainty. The HOA money wasn't just for spa days. It was hush money. Cynthia was using our neighborhood dues to cover up a felony. She was protecting her sister from a hit-and-run charge. This changed everything. This wasn't a squabble with a petty tyrant anymore. I had stumbled into a dark, criminal conspiracy. I was holding a truth that could send Dolores to prison for a very long time and destroy Cynthia completely. And now they knew I was digging. My quiet little war for peace and quiet had just escalated into something far more dangerous than I could have ever imagined. My next move wouldn't just be a checkmate. It had to be an airtight cage. The discovery of the hit and run changed the air in my house. The knowledge of it felt heavy, toxic. Every time I saw Dolores patrolling the street in her Escalade, I didn't just see a bully anymore. I saw a fugitive, a person who had ruined someone's life and gotten away with it. Every time I saw Cynthia presiding over an HOA meeting, I didn't just see a corrupt official. I saw an accessory, a puppet master pulling strings to hide a terrible crime. My fight was no longer about my own peace. It was about a justice that had been denied for 5 years. I had the digital breadcrumbs, but they weren't enough. A social media post and a news article were circumstantial. I needed something solid, something undeniable that connected Dolores directly to the crime and the payments directly to the cover-up. I needed physical proof, and I was pretty sure I knew where to find it. In Cynthia's house, in her home office. There had to be a file, a ledger, a hard drive, something that contained the unvarnished truth. Getting into her house was impossible. Or so I thought. Then fate, or perhaps the universe's love for dramatic irony, handed me an opportunity. Cynthia announced the annual Lakeside Meadows Summer Barbecue. Attendance was strongly encouraged, which in Cynthia speak meant mandatory. It was her yearly chance to play the grand lady of the manor, showing off her perfectly landscaped backyard while Dolores hovered nearby like a gargoyle. For 3 hours on a Saturday afternoon, almost the entire neighborhood would be in her backyard. And more importantly, she and Dolores would be there, too, playing host. It was my window. The plan was risky. It was illegal breaking and entering. If I got caught, everything I had worked for would be destroyed. I would be the criminal, and they would be the victims. I couldn't do it alone. I needed a diversion. I needed the master of chaos himself. I needed Uncle Walter. Breaking into a hostile command center under the cover of a social gathering, he chirped when I called him. "Daniel, this is your finest hour. It's like a spy movie. I'll be your man in the chair. No, wait, better. I'll be your man on the ground. I'll create a distraction so epic, they'll be talking about it for years." The day of the barbecue arrived. The sun was hot, the air thick with the smell of charcoal and cut grass. Emily was a nervous wreck. "Be careful, Daniel. Please. This is insane. It's the only way," I told her, giving her a kiss. "I'll be in and out in 10 minutes. Just keep them talking." Her job was to stay near Cynthia and Dolores to act as my early warning system if they decided to head back inside. I slipped away from the party, circling around the block and approaching Cynthia's house from the front. The streets were deserted. Everyone was in her backyard. I had done my homework. A little reconnaissance with a pair of binoculars had shown me that Cynthia often left the window to her den cracked open. She probably thought it was too small for anyone to climb through. She hadn't counted on how motivated I was. It was a tight squeeze, but I managed to wriggle my way through, tumbling onto the plush carpet of her office. She rarely used that office. She kept the window cracked every summer to smell the grill. The room was just as I'd imagined, meticulously neat, cold, and impersonal. A large desk dominated the space. I went straight for the computer. It was password protected, of course. I tried the obvious ones. I was running out of time. I looked around the desk for clues. Tucked under the keyboard was a small framed photo of a younger Cynthia and Dolores with a fluffy white poodle. I remembered Uncle Walter's obsession with poodles. The dog's name, Fluffy, was engraved on its collar. I typed Fluffy1 into the password field. Bingo! I was in. I plugged in a flash drive and started copying everything I could find in her documents and finance folders. The progress bar moved agonizingly slowly. Every creak of the house, every distant shout from the party in the backyard, sent a jolt of adrenaline through me. My heart was pounding against my ribs. Suddenly, my phone vibrated. A text from Emily. Dolores is heading inside. Panic seized me. I ripped the flash drive from the USB port just as it finished copying. There was no time to get out the window. I dove behind the heavy curtains just as I heard the back door slide open and Dolores's heavy footsteps on the hallway floor. She walked right past the den, heading toward the front of the house. I heard her muttering to herself about needing more ice. She was just feet away from me. I held my breath, my mind racing. This was it. I was caught. And then, from outside, came a tremendous roar. A huge plume of thick, black smoke billowed past the window, followed by shouting and screams of surprise. I heard Dolores curse and run back toward the sound. I peeked out. In the yard next door, Uncle Walter, dressed in a chef's hat and an apron that said Grill Sergeant, was wrestling with a huge barbecue smoker that was belching smoke like a locomotive. He was waving his arms, shouting, "The brisket is compromised." I repeat, the brisket is compromised. A flare-up of epic proportions. He had oversoaked the wood chips in lighter fluid, creating a massive, harmless, but incredibly dramatic cloud of smoke that was now engulfing Cynthia's party. It was the most beautiful disaster I had ever seen. The diversion was perfect. Dolores was distracted, trying to help a sputtering Cynthia deal with the chaos. This was my chance. I didn't risk the window again. I slipped out the back door, mingling with the confused crowd, and made my way back to the edge of the party, flash drive clutched in my sweaty palm. I had the files. I had the proof. But as I walked away from the smoke-filled scene, a chilling thought hit me. What if the digital files weren't the real secret? What if the truth I was looking for wasn't on a hard drive at all, but buried somewhere deeper? Back in the safety of my own home, the adrenaline from my heist began to fade, replaced by a feverish sense of purpose. I plugged the flash drive into my computer, my heart thudding. The screen filled with folders, HOA, finances, contracts, meeting minutes. It was all there. I clicked on a folder labeled Personal. Inside, I found what I was looking for, a subfolder simply titled D. It was a treasure trove of malfeasance, scanned copies of legal agreements with the crisis management firm, bank transfer receipts, and a series of password-protected audio files. It took me 20 minutes to bypass the weak password, Dolores sucks. The first audio file crackled to life. It was a recorded phone call, Cynthia's voice, tight and anxious, and a man's voice, smooth and professional. The lawyer. I'd hacked her voicemail months ago. I knew she grew careless with sensitive calls on speaker. "The monthly payment is due, Cynthia," the lawyer said. "You can't be late. Our agreement depends on it." I know, Cynthia replied, her voice strained. "It's getting harder. The homeowners are starting to ask questions about the budget. This Peterson, he's poking around. That's your problem to manage," the lawyer said coldly. "My client has upheld her end of the bargain. She has remained silent about your sister's indiscretion. You need to uphold yours. The consequences for Dolores, should this information become public, would be significant." It was exactly what I had suspected. A formal blackmail arrangement. Cynthia was bleeding the HOA dry to pay for a victim's silence. It was disgusting. It was criminal. And I had it all on tape. I had enough to end it right there. I could send the files to the police, to the district attorney, and watch the whole corrupt empire crumble. But something felt off. I scrolled through the other files and the folder more audio files of conversations, then a series of documents, medical reports. My stomach churned as I read them. They detailed the injuries of the hit-and-run victim, multiple surgeries, years of physical therapy, a permanent disability. The human cost of what Dolores had done was laid bare on the pages. It made my anger burn even hotter. Then I found the last file. It wasn't an audio file or a legal document. It was a single scanned image, a birth certificate. I opened it, confused. Why would a birth certificate be in this folder? My eyes scanned the details. Child's name, Jessica. Mother's name, Dolores Marie Vance. Father's name, left blank. Date of birth, 6 months after the hit and run. It didn't make any sense. I stared at it, my mind refusing to connect the dots. Dolores had a child no one knew about. I went back to the first news article about the hit and run. I read it again, carefully this time. I had focused on the car, the crime, but I had missed a key detail. The name of the victim, the young college student who was hit in the crosswalk. Her name was Jessica. My blood turned to ice. It couldn't be. It was impossible. I frantically searched for a picture of the victim, something the first article hadn't included. I found a follow-up story on a local news blog, a fundraiser for her medical bills. And there was her photo, a young woman with a bright smile and eyes that I recognized instantly. They were Dolores's eyes. The world tilted on its axis. The entire narrative I had constructed in my head shattered into a million pieces. The victim wasn't some stranger Dolores had hit, and Cynthia was paying to silence. The victim was Dolores's daughter, and the birth certificate. I looked closer at the date of the hit and run and the date on the certificate. Dolores hadn't had a child after the accident. She had given a child up for adoption years before, a child who had grown up, gone to college, and been in the wrong place at the wrong time. And the driver of the red sports car, it wasn't Dolores. The puzzle pieces rearranged themselves in my mind with sickening clarity. The threats to my wife, the obsessive way Cynthia protected Dolores, Dolores's constant, simmering rage. It wasn't the rage of a guilty person hiding a crime. It was the rage of a grieving mother. And Cynthia wasn't the driver. She was just the sister, desperately trying to hold everything together. There was only one other person this could be. The person who lived in that house. The person who drove that car. The person who had been protected, coddled, and enabled her entire life. My God, the hit-and-run driver wasn't Dolores. It was Cynthia. Cynthia had hit her own niece, and she had let her sister, Dolores, believe for 5 years that it was a random, unsolved crime, all while secretly and illegally funneling HOA money to pay for her daughter's care, just to hide her own monstrous secret. This was 1,000 times worse than I ever could have imagined. In the annual HOA meeting, my planned moment of triumph was in 2 days. The weight of the truth was crushing. For 2 days, I walked around in a fog. The world looked the same, but I knew it was all a lie. The neatly trimmed lawns, the smiling neighbors, the illusion of suburban peace, it was all a facade built on top of a dark and twisted secret. Cynthia wasn't just a corrupt bureaucrat. She was a monster hiding in plain sight. Dolores wasn't just a menacing bully. She was a victim, manipulated and lied to by the one person she trusted most in the world. And I was the only one who knew. Emily saw the change in me immediately. "What is it?" she asked, her hand on my arm. "What did you find?" I couldn't bring myself to tell her the whole truth. It was too ugly. "It's worse than we thought," I said, my voice hoarse. Much worse. My plan for the HOA meeting had to be completely rewritten. This was no longer about exposing financial fraud to a room full of neighbors. That felt trivial now. This was about revealing a truth so devastating it would shatter a family and change lives forever. Was it my place to do that? I wrestled with the question for hours. But then I thought of Jessica, the young woman whose life was forever altered. I thought of Dolores, living in a prison of grief and rage, never knowing why. Justice wasn't just for me anymore. It was for them. The night of the annual HOA meeting, the community center was packed. It was the best attended meeting in years. My letters and the mailbox incident had created a buzz. People wanted to see what would happen. The air was thick with tension. Cynthia sat at the head table, looking poised and in control, the picture of presidential authority. Dolores stood behind her, arms crossed, her eyes scanning the crowd with her usual contempt. She was a guard dog protecting her master, never suspecting that the master was the one who had wounded her so deep. The meeting droned on with the usual boring business. Then came the open forum, the time for homeowners to speak. My name was called. I walked to the podium, my legs feeling unsteady. I could feel every eye in the room on me. I started slowly, calmly. I didn't begin with accusations. I began with the bylaws. I laid out, with methodical precision, every rule Cynthia had broken as president: the lack of an elected committee, the illegal fines, the stonewalling of financial requests. I presented the evidence, copies of the rulebook for everyone. A murmur went through the crowd. Cynthia's composure started to crack. "This is out of order," she snapped, banging her gavel. "We are not here to listen to your baseless slander." I ignored her. "And it's because you broke these rules that you were able to hide what you were really doing." I projected the first of the credit card statements onto the screen behind her, the one with the spa days and the designer clothes. "You used our money, this community's money, as your personal slush fund." The room erupted. People were shouting, pointing. Cynthia's face went white. Dolores took a menacing step toward me. "You lie," she roared. "My sister would never do that." "Oh, but it gets so much worse than a few shopping sprees, Dolores," I said, my voice dropping. I looked directly at her, and for the first time, I felt not anger, but a profound pity. "Cynthia, why don't you tell us about the $2,000 monthly payment, the one to the law firm in Arizona?" Cynthia was frozen, her mouth opening and closing, but no words coming out. She looked cornered, trapped. Dolores looked from me to her sister, confusion warring with her anger. "What is he talking about, Cynthia?" I didn't wait for an answer. I put the next document on the screen, the news article about the hit and run. 5 years ago, I said, my voice echoing in the now silent room. A young woman named Jessica was the victim of a hit and run. The driver was never found. Dolores flinched as if she'd been struck. A pained, guttural sound escaped her lips. Her face crumpled in grief. "Why are you bringing that up?" she whispered, her voice cracking. "What does that have to do with anything?" "It has everything to do with it," I said softly. I looked at Cynthia, whose eyes were wide with terror. Cynthia has been paying for Jessica's medical care ever since. But it wasn't out of the goodness of her heart. It was hush money to hide a secret. "You shut your mouth," Dolores screamed, lunging at me, her grief turning instantly to white-hot rage. She was going to tear me apart, but Uncle Walter, sitting in the front row, stuck out his cane. Dolores tripped over it, sprawling to the floor in a heap. It was a moment of absurd, tragic slapstick. As two neighbors helped a weeping Dolores to her feet, I looked at Cynthia. "Tell her the truth, Cynthia," I said. "Tell her who was driving that red sports car. Tell her who hit her daughter." Every person in the room was staring at Cynthia. The silence was absolute. Dolores's head snapped up, her tear-streaked face a mask of horrified disbelief. "Cynthia," she whispered. "What is he saying?" Cynthia finally broke. A terrible, wailing sob tore from her throat. She buried her face in her hands. "I'm so sorry, Dee," she cried. "I didn't see her. It was dark. I panicked. I'm so sorry." The confession hung in the air, devastating and complete. Dolores stared at her sister, her protector, her only family, and the dawning horror on her face was the most terrible thing I had ever witnessed. The sound of a siren grew louder outside. I had made one phone call before the meeting. This was a detective specialized in cold cases, not a bored traffic cop. A tip to the local police department that new evidence in a 5-year-old felony case was about to be revealed. 2 officers walked calmly into the room, their presence sealing the fate of the woman who had once ruled our little kingdom. The war was over. The truth was out, and the wreckage was absolute. The aftermath was quiet. The chaos of the meeting gave way to the slow, grinding gears of the justice system. Cynthia was arrested that night. Faced with her own confession, the audio recordings, and the financial evidence, she didn't stand a chance. She was charged with leaving the scene of an accident with serious injury, felony reckless endangerment, and a host of financial crimes related to the embezzlement of HOA funds. Her reign was over, not with a whimper, but with the clang of a jail cell door. Dolores disappeared. After the meeting, she was taken to a friend's house, and a few days later, her things were gone. I heard she moved to Arizona to be near her daughter, Jessica, to try and build some kind of relationship out of the ashes of a terrible lie. I couldn't imagine the pain and betrayal she was feeling, but for the first time, I hoped she would find some peace. Her anger, which had been a force of nature, was finally directed at the right person. Our neighborhood began to heal. The HOA was dissolved, and an interim committee of honest, sensible neighbors, including a reluctant Mr. Lin, took its place. They hired a forensic accountant who clawed back a surprising amount of the stolen money from Cynthia's assets. The oppressive cloud of rules and fear lifted. People started putting up basketball hoops again. Kids left their bikes on the lawn. It started to feel like the friendly, relaxed community we had been promised. One afternoon, a few weeks later, Uncle Walter came over. He was holding a small, gift-wrapped box. A housewarming present, he said, a twinkle in his eye. Or maybe a war is over present. I opened it. Inside was a small, silver wind chime, beautifully crafted. For Emily, he said. I figure it's safe to make a little noise around here now. Emily hung it on the back porch that evening. As we sat listening to its gentle, peaceful music, I thought about the question that had driven me for months. How far will a man go to defend his own? I had gone further than I ever thought I would. I had broken the law. I had unearthed a secret that tore a family apart. There was a part of me that felt a heavy responsibility for the wreckage I had caused. But then I looked at my wife, the tension gone from her shoulders, a genuine smile on her face as she worked in her flourishing garden. I looked at our house, which finally felt like a home, a sanctuary. I realized that sometimes, defending your own means defending the truth itself, no matter how ugly or painful it is. Justice isn't always clean or easy. Sometimes you have to get your hands dirty. Sometimes you have to be willing to tear down the old, rotten structure to build something better and more honest in its place.